Thank you, and yeah, it's really great to be here today. I've been to a few Coastal Futures conferences over the years, and until about a year ago, I had quite a UK-focused job. For the last year and a bit, I've had a very kind of European-focused job, and so it's given me a chance to see some of the differences in how offshore wind is managed in the UK compared to in our neighbouring countries in Europe. And so when I saw this session was coming, I was like, well, this is great. I can come and share some of what I've noticed in the last year or so. First of all, just to step back a bit, I think everybody in the room probably agrees, or at least accepts, that offshore wind is a really important part of reaching our net zero goals. But when you look at it on the map, there is a huge amount of sea that's going to be involved in offshore wind farms. And so in Europe, just as much as in the UK, balancing that growth of offshore wind with the recovery of marine species and habitats is absolutely recognised as being essential. But what I've noticed over the last year is that there's a real difference in what the priority topics are amongst different nations, more so than I'd expected, and also the approaches that they take to solving these challenges. And so what we are trying to do within RWE is to collaborate better across different nations, make sure that we're innovating in the places that it makes sense, and then sharing that back across with our other markets, so that we can kind of make the sum of the parts greater than the individual pieces, if you know what I mean. So that's the goal. We talked about the mitigation hierarchy earlier, and I'll give some examples of the things that we're doing to avoid, minimise, restore and offset. I think one thing we haven't talked so much about this time, but I know we have in the past, is the real challenge of quantifying the impact. So quantifying marine impacts is very difficult at an individual species or habitat level. It's so much more difficult when you try and put them together at an ecosystem level. And so a real focus for us is on how do we do that. In the UK, we look at marine net gain. In Europe, we look at it more through a biodiversity positive impact lens, but it's the same principle. It's how do we get back to zero and then get to achieving positive impacts overall. So the offshore wind industry is very much bought into the concept of net positive impacts for biodiversity, but the definition, the metrics, how exactly we're going to do that is still a work in progress for us as much as it is for policymakers around the world. What we feel we have a very strong role in is pilots and research to test out the measures that can get us there. And so a lot of my job, which focuses on innovation for biodiversity, is developing those pilots and trying to get things in the water so we can really test and measure what works. And we also do that through collaboration with external partners, NGOs, academia, trying to align on how we do this in a consistent way. So I'm going to whiz through a few quick examples, and really happy to talk about any of these in more detail afterwards, but that cover those different parts of the mitigation hierarchy. So on impact measurement, we've got a big pilot called CME, which stands for Sustainable Ecosystem Approach in Monitoring the Marine Environment. And this is trying to move away from collecting data on different species and receptors completely separately, often at different times of the year, towards a lower impact, less carbon intensive, and more simultaneous way of collecting data. So we've got a whole series of sensors and then drones for aerial observations deployed over a long-term period in one of our German offshore wind farms. And then a real focus on the data integration piece to bring all of those data sets together and give us kind of much closer to real-time sense of what's happening in and around the wind farm. So that is, some of the data collection has started, others are going to start later this year, and that's running through until 2026. We also have a lot of measures that are already in widespread use. So there's just a few examples on here of things that we do to minimise impacts on marine mammals in particular. But as I mentioned, there's a big focus that varies around Europe. So within Denmark and Germany, there's a lot of use of bubble curtains. In several of our markets, lots of focus on reducing vessel traffic and using acoustic deterrents. And so we're trying to bring what we're learning from those in our different markets together so that we can recommend the right measures for the right projects. We are also testing new technologies. So a couple of examples of these are black blades to see whether they work for reducing the number of collisions between birds and wind turbines. So one of our coastal wind farms has 7 turbines with one blade painted black, and the results of that research should come out very soon. And we've been involved in a vibropiling trial, which is a potentially lower impact installation method for monopiles at our Kashkazi wind farm in Germany. On the restoration, offsetting and net positive impact, we've got a number of pilots underway around nature-inclusive design, different kinds of technologies. This is an example of one that was installed last summer at our Karahamn wind farm in Sweden, where we've installed 3 large artificial reefs made of reef cubes. And we're monitoring those over the next couple of years to see how the habitat develops around them. But one thing I really wanted to highlight is the difference in focus of the research centres that we see around Europe. So, and I'll only give a few examples here, but in the Netherlands and Belgium, we do a lot of work through their GROW programme, which is very focused on developing the engineering solutions that can help to reduce those impacts, and a real centre of excellence for lowering noise impacts. There's also lots of research in these 2 markets on multi-use of sites, and because fishing doesn't take place within offshore wind farms, that opens up a lot of different possibilities for both trialling different kinds of multi-use and also trying nature-inclusive design structures in a way that's more challenging to do in the UK. Within France, there is a big research programme called France Energies Marine, which covers both engineering and environmental topics. They do lots of work building ecosystem models with a lot of instrumentation, and it's a real centre of excellence for looking at biofouling and ecotoxicology impacts. And then in Germany and Scandinavia, there's a lot of focus on partnerships with universities. So again, I've only listed a couple of examples here, but really working very closely with industry with kind of living lab type experiments, working students coming in, partnering with industry, and then working on some really big interdisciplinary complex modelling type research. And so my kind of takeaway, I guess, stepping back from all of this, is I really think there are some huge strengths here in the UK and there are huge strengths in Europe. And in terms of accelerating how we can make the change that we need to make by 2030, I actually think we've got a lot of the answers already, but they're in different places, and we need to get better at bringing them together. These lists could both be much, much longer, but these are some that really stood out to me as kind of a bit of a sort of difference between the two regions, I guess. So in Europe, the auctions actually sort of bring the ecological elements in directly, and that has its challenges, but it also leads to kind of government-funded research programs that use common methods across multiple sites, which can be quite useful. The ecosystem and food web models are very useful for predicting those kind of regional scale effects, and then all of the engineering-focused measures where they're getting it out and they're trialing and really measuring where the different kinds of designs can lower the impact from a sort of very much an engineering-led lens. Here in the UK, starting with the second one first, actually, I think we have the biggest focus on data and data transparency. I know it's not everything that we'd like it to be, but we've got a good focus on data here. And then that focus on developing marine net gain, I think the UK is definitely putting more energy into that, I guess, than we see elsewhere. And then on the more specialist topics, so social impacts, we talk about that a lot here at this conference, and when I compare that to how that's discussed in our European projects, we are way ahead on understanding the complexity of the social impact of offshore wind. Similarly, marine mammals and birds, absolutely a centre of excellence here in the UK for understanding those from a receptor level. And so if we start to put together those different elements, so we take the engineering-led strengths from Europe and the real deep understanding of the impacts from the UK and stitch those together on a topic-by-topic basis, I think we can take huge steps forward much more quickly. Thanks.